It started as an ordinary walk home on a quiet February night in 2010. But by dawn, his body lay on Old Broome Road, shoes kicked off, phone shattered, red dust staining his shirt like a second skin. In a town where people left doors unlocked and waved to strangers, Noah Kendrick vanished into the silence, and Broome would never be the same. For years, the truth slept beneath layers of mistakes and silence until a forgotten photo, 13 years later, cracked the case wide open. So, before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight and what time is it there? Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and join us as we uncover the haunting story of the Broome Nightwalker, a cold case that refused to die. Broome, Western Australia, a small town at the edge of the world, where red earth meets the blue Indian Ocean, where every sunset sets the sky on fire, and life seems frozen in a postcard. In 2010, Broome was more a feeling than a place. Heat shimmering on empty roads, the distant cry of a curlew echoing across endless mangroves, locals waving to each other as if everyone was family. Violence here was something people watched on television, never expecting to face it in their own backyard. On the night of February 26, 2010, the air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of salt and frangipani. At the Oasis Bar, a weathered little watering hole where the locals gathered to blow off steam, Noah Kendrick stood out for his easy laughter and the way he clapped friends on the back, making even strangers feel welcome. At 22, Noah was the sort of young man who made people believe in second chances. He'd been helping his mother rebuild their old house after the loss of his father, and worked hard as a carpenter on job sites around town. That night, he tossed back a couple of beers, let the music wash over him, and joked that he'd walk home just to hear the sound of the waves. Nobody thought twice about it. Broome was the kind of place where you could walk barefoot down Main Street after midnight, with only the ocean breeze for company. So, when Noah said his goodbyes around 1:45 a.m., his friends waved him off, shouting promises to meet up for breakfast at Matzo's Brewery the next day. But by sunrise, everything would change. When the first light crept over the horizon, Old Broome Road was deserted. Just a strip of blacktop cutting through the low-lying scrub, 2 kilometers from Noah's house. That's where a delivery driver, running early, spotted something out of place. A young man's body lying face down near the edge of the road, legs twisted awkwardly as if dropped from the sky. His shirt was streaked with red dust, the kind that sticks to your skin like a second layer. His phone was shattered, pieces scattered like broken teeth along the roadside. His shoes, oddly, were several feet away, as if kicked off in a final moment of struggle. There were no screech marks, no shards of headlight, no evidence of a hit and run, just silence, broken by the hum of flies gathering in the dawn. When police arrived, they cordoned off the area and began their work, taking photographs, measuring distances, combing through the sand for anything that might resemble a clue. To the untrained eye, it looked like an accident. To the seasoned detective, something felt wrong from the start. News of the discovery rippled through Broome like a stone dropped in still water. Locals emerged from their houses, whispering across fences and under the shade of gum trees. Rumors began to swirl. Maybe Noah had stumbled into the path of a passing car. Maybe he'd collapsed from heat stroke. Maybe, just maybe, something darker had happened out on that lonely road. For Noah's mother, Lynn Kendrick, the world seemed to stop spinning. She had raised her son alone since her husband's tragic death in a workplace accident, and now, with one phone call, the life they had rebuilt was shattered beyond recognition. The tiny town, so used to routine and safety, suddenly found itself thrust into a nightmare it never saw coming. In the days that followed, investigators scoured every inch of Old Broome Road. Blood tests, soil samples, security camera footage, all became pieces of a puzzle that, at first, made no sense at all. How could a night filled with laughter end in such unexplained tragedy? How could a walk home beneath the stars turn fatal in a place where nothing ever happens? As the sun set on Broome, painting the sky crimson once again, one fact was clear. Something terrible had happened that night. And while the ocean still whispered against the sand, the people of Broome began to realize that their town would never be the same. The calm had been shattered, and the nightmare was only just beginning. In Broome, people knew each other by name, or at least by reputation. It was a place where small acts of kindness echoed for weeks, where old grudges simmered beneath the surface, but neighbors still helped each other mend fences after a storm. The town's heartbeat was slow and steady, the kind of place that made outsiders wonder how anyone could ever feel lonely here. But even in close-knit communities, secrets could fester in the shadows. Noah Kendrick was more than a victim. He was a son, a friend, and to many, the promise of better days ahead. His mother, Lynn Kendrick, had worked nights at Broome Hospital for as long as anyone could remember. She was the sort who brought soup to sick neighbors and bandaged scraped knees in the schoolyard long after her own shift had ended. Since her husband's fatal accident on a mining site years before, Lynn had poured every bit of herself into raising Noah. Together, they built a quiet life of routines and small joys. A surfboard leaned against the porch, Sunday afternoons strumming a battered guitar, laughter that carried through open windows on warm nights. Noah was the kind of man who made friends wherever he went. He loved surfing the wild waves at Cable Beach, shouting at the sky as he rode the break. He fixed his mother's old Ford on weekends, never charging a cent to tune up a neighbor's engine. At the Oasis bar, he was known for playing Pearl Jam covers, his voice hoarse and honest, drawing applause from tourists and locals alike. Some said he could have left Broome for bigger things, but he stayed, promising his mother, "When I've saved enough, I'll rebuild this house for you." In a town full of drifting souls, Noah had roots. Broome itself was a paradox, stunning by day, unsettling by night. Tourists flocked here for the camel rides and crimson sunsets, but when the sun slipped away and fog rolled in from the coast, the town transformed. The air thickened with salt and secrets, the streets empty except for the distant wail of a freight train or the bark of a stray dog. After 2 a.m., a blanket of silence fell over the sleepy neighborhoods. Streetlights buzzed behind curtains of mist, their yellow halos swallowed by the dark. It was somewhere in that heavy, moonless silence that Noah vanished. Between the laughter at the bar and the cold dawn, something inexplicable happened on Old Broome Road. The people of Broome tried to make sense of it, retracing steps, replaying that final night in their minds. Some recalled seeing Noah's silhouette along the sidewalk, shoulders hunched, hands in his pockets, a figure cut out against the pearly haze. Others remembered only the eerie emptiness that followed, the way sound seemed to die on the air, the way headlights looked strange in the fog. Whispers traveled fast in Broome. In the days after Noah's death, the town was gripped by a kind of collective mourning, each person examining their own memories, wondering if they'd missed a sign. Old men sat on their porches, staring at the ocean, trading theories in low voices. Teenagers dared each other to walk the stretch of road where Noah was found, swearing they heard footsteps in the grass or saw shadows flicker in the corner of their eyes. For Lynn, the loss was like a wound that would not close. She spent her nights sitting at the kitchen table, turning Noah's battered phone over and over in her hands, searching for meaning in its shattered screen. She whispered to the darkness, "You said you wanted to hear the waves. Why did the waves take you?" Even as the world outside tried to move on, Broome was changed. The familiar routines became haunted by absence, a surfboard gathering dust, an empty stool at the Oasis bar, the echo of a song unfinished. People who once believed violence belonged to far-off cities now locked their doors at night and glanced over their shoulders on empty streets. Some tragedies are too big to fit in a police report or a news article. In Broome, Noah Kendrick's story became a part of the landscape, a reminder that even the safest places can hide danger, that loss can seep into the soil and linger long after the headlines fade. The timeline of Noah Kendrick's final hours became an obsession for everyone involved: police, journalists, even neighbors who'd barely known him. It was as if reconstructing each moment might somehow unravel the riddle that haunted Broome, might bring back the possibility of a world where violence was still only something seen on television. After leaving the Oasis bar at 1:45 a.m., Noah slipped into the shadows, following the road home as he'd done countless times before. Security footage from the Shell Broome South gas station caught him at 2:05 a.m., a grainy image of a young man alone under flickering fluorescent lights, hands buried in his pockets, head bowed slightly against the wind. There was nothing remarkable about the footage, yet people watched it over and over, searching for a clue in the way he moved or the angle of his shoulders. A taxi driver later reported seeing someone matching Noah's description walking along the shoulder of Old Broome Road, weaving slightly but steady on his feet. A little drunk, maybe, but far from helpless. The taxi's headlights swept across him, and the driver remembered the way the figure didn't look up, as if wrapped in his own thoughts or perhaps lost in the lullaby of the distant waves. It was a fleeting encounter, and the driver rolled on into the night, unaware of what was coming. Minutes later, another driver, this one a nurse on her way to the early shift, spotted a shape lying near the curb. At first, she thought it might be an animal or an abandoned backpack, something easily overlooked on a foggy morning. But as she drew closer, her headlights revealed the truth. A body, legs bent awkwardly into the grass, face turned towards the pavement as if Noah had simply fallen and never gotten up again. Police arrived quickly, cordoning off the scene and calling in a pathologist. Their first theory was the obvious one: an accident, a hit and run. Yet, from the very start, things didn't add up. Noah's shoes were found several feet away, neither scuffed nor torn. His shirt was smeared with Broome's signature red dust, but there were no skid marks, no plastic or glass debris, none of the telltale signs that a car had left the road. The on-scene pathologist delivered an observation that would cast a long shadow over the investigation. The fracture pattern is inconsistent with a vehicle impact. The force came from the side, not from above, not like a car. Noah's head injury, it seemed, had come from a blow, not a collision. But if not a car, then what? Or who? Rumors spread like wildfire through the town. Some whispered about a fight gone wrong, a mugging, or the possibility of an out-of-towner with a grudge. Others pointed to the loneliness of the road, the kind of darkness where old secrets and fresh sins could easily hide. In the absence of answers, suspicion grew like mold in the wet season. Unseen, yet everywhere. The investigation quickly became tangled. Detectives canvassed the area, knocking on doors, pulling camera footage from nearby businesses, chasing down every possible lead. But the night was stubborn, keeping its secrets. Noah's phone, shattered into pieces, held no messages from that final hour. There were no eyewitnesses, no clear suspects, just a sense of rising unease that settled over Broome like the ever-present fog. For Lynn Kendrick, every minute felt like a lifetime. She replayed her son's last words, remembered his easy smile, and tried to imagine what could have happened in the darkness between the bar and home. She clung to hope, even as the facts became more elusive and the official story grew clouded by uncertainty. Somewhere, on that lonely road between laughter and silence, Noah Kendrick's life had ended. The evidence pointed to a struggle, to violence that had no place in the Broome Lynn knew. Yet, as days became weeks and the mystery deepened, the people of Broome could only wait and wonder. What evil had walked among them that night? What really happened on Old Broome Road? The answers, for now, remained lost in the mist, as if the night itself had swallowed the truth whole. In a town as small as Broome, bad news doesn't spread, it erupts. The morning after Noah Kendrick was found, the whole community felt the aftershock, as if a storm had ripped through their quiet world. Shops opened late. The local bakery, usually bustling by sunrise, was hushed, the only sound the scrape of a broom against the tile. At the hospital, Lynn Kendrick moved through her shift like a ghost, her face pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, her hands shaking even as she pressed gauze to a patient's wound. News crews arrived, their vans parked awkwardly by the roadside shrine that began to form almost immediately. Someone placed a ring of seashells around the spot where Noah's body had been found. Wildflowers, plucked from the dunes, wilted quickly in the heat, but were replaced again and again by strangers and friends alike. By the end of the day, candles flickered in the breeze, their flames tiny but stubborn, small beacons of memory against a sea of unanswered questions. Lynn returned to that roadside shrine every day. She sat for hours, cross-legged in the red dust, eyes locked on the horizon. Sometimes she would talk to Noah, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "You said you wanted to hear the waves," she'd murmur. "Why did the waves take you?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable, as the surf thundered in the distance, relentless and indifferent. The town mourned, each in their own way. The regulars at the Oasis bar left Noah's favorite stool empty, a silent toast to the friend they'd lost. At Cable Beach, a candlelight vigil drew hundreds. In the fading twilight, the sight was almost otherworldly. Flickering flames reflected on the dark water, faces illuminated in a circle of light, grief shared by an entire community. Some cried openly. Others stared into the surf, searching for meaning in the endless rhythm of the waves. But beneath the outpouring of sympathy, a harder edge began to form, a suspicion, a restlessness. If this wasn't an accident, who among them was capable of murder? Some neighbors eyed each other warily, conversations stalling when the subject of that night came up. Rumors slithered through the streets. People whispered about strangers passing through town, about old grudges and debts unpaid, about fights in the dark that no one had witnessed. The peace that once defined Broome was gone, replaced by something jagged and uneasy. For Lynn, the pain was both public and deeply private. Reporters wanted statements. Detectives wanted memories. Well-wishers brought casseroles she couldn't eat and cards she couldn't read. At night, she wandered from room to room in her silent house, stopping to run her hand over the surfboard Noah left leaning by the door, to touch the guitar he never finished tuning. She kept his room exactly as it was, the faded band posters, the sand on the windowsill, the pile of clothes still smelling of salt and sun. Each day, Lynn replayed the last week of Noah's life in her mind, searching for anything she might have missed. Did he seem worried? Had he argued with someone? Was there a sign, some hidden plea for help? The answers slipped through her fingers, replaced by the ache of what would never be, the sound of his laughter, the promise to rebuild the house, a life cut brutally short. Broome, once proud of its isolation and safety, now found itself thrust under a harsh spotlight. The town was grieving, but it was also changing. Parents called their children home early. Doors that once remained open were locked at sunset. Even the ocean seemed to mourn, its waves crashing more fiercely against the shore, as if trying to wash away the stain of violence. The road where Noah was found became a line in the sand, a place people hurried past, eyes averted, or visited in silence, laying flowers, lighting candles, or saying a prayer. The shrine grew. So did the questions. One, above all, refused to fade. If this wasn't an accident, who killed Noah Kendrick? And beneath the surface, grief began to harden into something else, a quiet resolve to find the truth, no matter how long it took or how deep the town had to dig. For a while, the town of Broome clung to the hope that answers would come quickly. The local police, under growing pressure from the media and frightened residents, launched a full-scale investigation. Detectives went door to door, searching for anyone who might have seen or heard something that night. They retraced Noah's steps with meticulous detail. Every bar receipt, every surveillance tape, every blurry memory from patrons who'd had too much to drink. The search for justice became relentless, but in their haste, mistakes began to grow, small at first, then catastrophic. Days turned to weeks. The initial shock gave way to frustration. The case grew colder with every sunrise, and soon the urgency to solve it threatened to override the need for caution. That was when the rumors took on a sharper edge. Whispers pointed toward the edges of town, toward the people who lived in the shadows, out of sight, often out of mind. A year after Noah's death, police announced a breakthrough. They'd arrested Caleb Murray, a 25-year-old indigenous man from Fitzroy Crossing. Caleb was known to locals as a gentle soul who wandered the streets, often barefoot, sometimes a little lost, sometimes mumbling to himself in a language few understood. He had a history of drinking, of sleeping rough near Old Broome Road, and, crucially, he'd been seen in the area on the night Noah died. What followed was less an interrogation than an ordeal. For 12 hours, police questioned Caleb. No lawyer sat beside him, no translator helped bridge the gap of language or understanding. Detectives asked the same questions over and over, pushing him to recall things he barely comprehended, using words and ideas that swirled around him like a storm. Exhausted, confused, Caleb finally signed a confession written for him, a vague admission that he'd hit someone with a stick. He couldn't say where, or when, or even why. The confession was enough. Police declared the case solved. There were no fingerprints, no blood tying Caleb to the scene, no witnesses who'd seen him with Noah. But the community's need for closure was greater than its appetite for doubt. By the time the case reached court in 2013, the narrative was already written. Prosecutors painted Caleb as a dangerous drifter, and in the absence of real evidence, the jury filled in the gaps with their own fear and prejudice. The verdict, manslaughter. The sentence, years behind bars. Broome exhaled, relieved to have its nightmare resolved, at least on paper. Police closed the file and called it justice. News crews packed up and left town. People went back to their routines, comforted by the illusion of closure. But for Lynn Kendrick, there was no relief, only a deeper, colder kind of grief. She watched the proceedings, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the real story had never come out. "My son didn't die by accident," she told anyone who would listen. "And that man, he's not the one who did it." Her words rang hollow against a system eager for simple answers. Caleb Murray was sent away, swallowed by the machinery of justice, his protests ignored, his story untold. In Broome, the candles at Noah's shrine burned lower, replaced by flowers that wilted faster and faster. Some in town celebrated an ending, but a quiet few, those who'd known Caleb, those who still listened to Lynn's quiet pleas, felt a growing unease, the sense that something essential had been missed. Yet, for most, Life moved on. The road where Noah was found remained a silent witness, carrying secrets as the seasons changed. The dust settled, the headlines faded. Only Lynn returned again and again, kneeling in the red dirt, whispering her son's name to the empty stretch of asphalt. For her, and for the truth, the case was far from over. And somewhere in the silence, the real killer's shadow lingered, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the day when the cracks in the story would finally let the truth shine through. Time has a strange way of stretching in a small town after a tragedy. In Broome, years after Noah Kendrick's death, the pain hadn't vanished. It had simply sunk deeper, like roots spreading under red earth. For most, the case was over. The police had caught their man, and newspapers had moved on to other stories. But for Lynn Kendrick and a stubborn few, the ending never felt right. The questions, the details that didn't fit, the ache that justice hadn't truly been served, all these lingered like a stubborn fog rolling in from the sea. Caleb Murray sat in prison, his life shrinking to the size of a cell. The world outside forgot his name, but the damage to him, and to Broome's soul, was lasting. Some nights, locals would hear the wind and think of the two mothers left behind, one mourning a son lost to violence, the other watching hers vanish behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. Broome's routines continued: sunsets over the mangroves, fishermen launching boats before dawn, the shouts of schoolchildren echoing down quiet streets. But something fundamental had changed. Trust was harder to come by. People glanced at their neighbors differently, suspicion flickering in their eyes even as they nodded hello. Meanwhile, Lynn Kendrick became a fixture at the edge of Old Broome Road, kneeling at her son's shrine, refusing to let the town or the world forget what was lost. Each year, on the anniversary of Noah's death, she mailed a letter to the police. Please reopen the file. Someone out there still knows the truth. Most years, her plea received nothing more than a polite reply, a standard acknowledgement before being filed away and forgotten. But Lynn's resolve hardened. She began writing to journalists, true crime bloggers, anyone who would listen. She shared every piece of evidence, every photo, every line from the autopsy report. She collected names, rumors, memories, never letting herself give in to despair. Then, in 2017, 7 years after the nightmare began, a spark reignited hope. An independent media team, working on a documentary about wrongful convictions, took an interest in Noah's case. What started as a review of public records soon revealed disturbing flaws. The journalists obtained hours of police footage and discovered, frame by frame, scenes where officers prompted Caleb Murray during questioning, feeding him details he could not possibly have known on his own. The so-called confession was riddled with inconsistencies, shaped by exhaustion and confusion. Simultaneously, a new forensic review was conducted by an expert brought in from Perth. The findings were damning. The head wound that killed Noah matched a direct blow from a blunt object, likely a hammer, not a glancing impact from a car. The evidence that had once looked ambiguous now pointed clearly away from the story presented in court. The narrative, built on shaky ground, finally began to crumble. The media investigation sent shockwaves across Western Australia. Broome was forced to look inward, to confront uncomfortable truths about justice and prejudice, about what happens when the machinery of law fails those most vulnerable. The case was brought before the Supreme Court of Western Australia, and Caleb Murray's conviction was overturned. After 5 years behind bars, he walked free, blinking into the sun, a quiet, broken man given back his life, if not the years that had been stolen. Caleb received $1.3 million in compensation, but there was no compensation for the lost time, for the wounds to his spirit, for the damage done to his family and to the fragile fabric of Broome. Noah Kendrick's murder was officially a cold case now. The file reopened, but the answers still out of reach. The police went silent. Most of Broome, desperate to move on, did the same. But not Lynn Kendrick. Her faith in justice was battered but unbroken. She kept writing, kept visiting the roadside, kept believing that someday, somehow, the truth would rise. She was a solitary figure in a landscape of forgetting, a mother unwilling to let the night have the last word. The years passed, but the question, who killed Noah Kendrick, still hung in the Broome air, as heavy and electric as the storms that rolled in from the sea, refusing to be ignored. By the time 13 years had passed since Noah Kendrick's death, the case was spoken of in Broome like a ghost story, something that happened to someone else long ago, best left undisturbed. But for Lynn Kendrick, and for a handful of dedicated investigators who refused to close the door completely, the sense of unfinished business remained sharp as ever. The shrine on Old Broome Road stood as a silent reminder that justice, even when delayed, was still a debt waiting to be paid. It was August of 2023 when a young digital technician named Amy Tran, tasked with digitizing cold case files for Western Australia police, noticed something odd. She'd seen hundreds of crime scene photos over the course of her work, most blurred, faded by time, their details nearly lost. But in one photo taken at sunrise on the day Noah's body was found, something caught her eye. Reflected in the chrome side mirror of the parked ambulance was a pair of headlights, caught mid-glare. The shape was distinct, a low, wide vehicle, with a front profile not common to sedans or standard utes. Zooming in, Amy realized what she was looking at. The unmistakable split grille and narrow lights of a white Holden Commodore ute. The detail had never appeared in official reports, never made its way into the original investigation's vehicle logs. Amy flagged the discovery for her supervisor, and soon the evidence team was pulling traffic records, cross-referencing vehicle registrations, and combing through old employment rosters from the night of February 26, 2010. That's when the name Brent Hanlon surfaced. Hanlon was 31 back in 2010, a construction worker with a reputation for hard drinking and short tempers, employed on a job site just blocks from the gas station where Noah was last seen alive. Hanlon's time cards showed he'd been working late shifts in the weeks leading up to Noah's death. Witness statements placed his white Holden Commodore ute in Broome on the night in question, yet his name appeared nowhere in the police notes from the original investigation. Digging deeper, detectives uncovered a pattern of violence. Hanlon had 2 previous arrests for drunken assaults. Both times led off with a warning after the victims declined to press charges. His work history showed instability, firings, and abrupt departures, always after altercations or failed drug tests. The real shock, however, came from an old worksite photograph dated just a year before Noah's death. Hanlon and Noah, standing side by side in the background, both wearing dusty overalls, both squinting into the sunlight. Co-workers remembered the two had clashed, especially after Hanlon was fired for showing up drunk and starting a fistfight. Noah, always the peacemaker, had tried to break it up, earning Hanlon's resentment. The more investigators looked, the more every missing piece began to fit. Hanlon had abruptly left Broome just 3 days after Noah's body was found, driving cross-country to Perth. There, his troubles only worsened, until, in 2015, Hanlon died in a high-speed car crash on a remote stretch of highway, leaving behind little more than a battered vehicle, a handful of debts, and an unanswered trail of suspicion. The discovery electrified the cold case squad. For Lynn Kendrick, the news was bittersweet. A new suspect, yes, but one who could no longer answer for what had happened that night. Still, for the first time in years, there was movement. a sense that the locked door was finally cracking open. Back in Broome, whispers spread quickly. Some townsfolk remembered Hanlon, a brooding presence at the bar, a sharp tongue, the sort who made people uncomfortable but was never considered truly dangerous. Others, learning of his connection to Noah, felt a jolt of guilt for never noticing, never connecting the dots. The case files were dusted off, the shrine on Old Broome Road adorned with new flowers and flickering candles, as if the community itself could sense that after all the years of silence the truth was clawing its way into daylight. And for Lynn, hope mingled with sorrow. She stood at the edge of the ocean, letting the surf soak her feet, and whispered her son's name, not just into the wind, but into a future where answers at last might finally be within reach. For years, the answers to Noah Kendrick's murder had been buried under layers of oversight, misdirection, and silence. Now, with Brent Hanlon's name rising from the dust of old records, the investigation accelerated with a new sense of urgency, despite the bitter knowledge that the man at the center of suspicion was already gone. Still, for Lynn Kendrick, and for the few investigators who had never truly given up, the pursuit of truth was no less vital. It was about more than punishment. It was about finally knowing what had happened on that lonely stretch of Old Broome Road. The search led detectives from Broome to Perth, where Hanlon's past seemed to spill out of the shadows. It was in the suburbs, at the edge of a storage lot choked with weeds and rusted fences, that the final piece of the puzzle was found. Hanlon's former storage shed stood forgotten behind a crumbling warehouse. Rent paid up to the month of his death, then left to the spiders and the dust. Inside, among the relics of a life half-lived, old tools, empty beer cans, boxes of broken electronics. Investigators found a small dirt-stained bundle hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Wrapped in layers of weathered cloth was a rusted hammer. Its handle bore faint traces of red dust and old, dark stains. A wave of dread swept over the scene. Forensics worked carefully, aware that what they held might be the very object that had ended a life and altered the course of a town's history. When the lab results returned, there was no longer room for doubt. DNA from the handle matched blood samples taken from Noah Kendrick's shirt. Even after so many years, the truth had survived, waiting for the right eyes to see it. The impact on Broome was immediate and profound. News of the discovery raced across Western Australia, lighting up headlines, talk radio, and group chats. People who had long ago made peace with the official version of events now had to reckon with the knowledge that justice had been denied, not once, but twice. The real killer had slipped through the cracks, and an innocent man had paid the price. For Lynn, the call from police came at dawn. The words were simple, clinical, confirmation of what her heart had known for years. But hearing it spoken aloud, having the final puzzle piece delivered at last, brought a mixture of relief and anguish. She let herself cry, openly and without shame, for the first time since the night she lost her son. She thought of all the years spent searching, doubting, hoping, of all the people who had stood by her, and those who had urged her to move on. Most of all, she thought of Noah, his laughter, his plans, the life he never got to live. Closure, people say, is the end of grief. But in Broome, it was more complicated than that. The town fell silent again, this time in disbelief. Conversations drifted back to that February night, to memories of Hanlon, now recast in a darker light. The road where Noah had died was renamed in the locals' minds, the Nightwalker Road, a place marked by tragedy, now finally marked by truth. In the weeks that followed, Lynn Kendrick carried her son's ashes to Cable Beach at sunrise. There, beneath a sky painted in gold and crimson, she let the surf carry him home. She released the last of her grief into the ocean he had loved so much, whispering a promise that she would never let his memory fade. Others joined her in quiet vigil, their faces turned toward the waves, reflecting on what it meant for justice to arrive so late, yet arrive all the same. Noah's story became more than a tale of loss. It was a testament to perseverance and the fierce, unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. Broome would never be the same, but for the first time in years, the town could breathe. A weight finally lifted, the truth finally unearthed. The story of Noah Kendrick felt, in the end, almost too harrowing to be real. A tangle of heartbreak, injustice, and redemption that echoed the rhythms of true crime, but rang with the ache of lived experience. Yet, as the news faded, and Broome's nights returned to their gentle, wind-stirred silence, the deeper resonance of Noah's case lingered, haunting the collective memory of Western Australia and beyond. Because, beneath the shifting names and the dramatic twists, there was a chilling truth. This story was rooted in something that really happened. In the early hours of February 2010, on Old Broome Road, a young man named Josh Warneke was found dead beneath the eerie glow of the streetlights. He was just 21, bright, hopeful, with a future unwritten. His loss tore a hole in his family, much as it did for the fictional Lynn Kendrick, and in his small community, the shockwave of his death rattled windows and hearts alike. The initial investigation into Josh's murder was marred by confusion and haste. In the desperate scramble for answers, police arrested a vulnerable Indigenous man named Gene Gibson. Like Caleb Murray in Noah's story, Gene was young, had limited English, and struggled with cognitive challenges. The interrogation was long and bewildering. He signed a confession after hours without a lawyer or interpreter, admitting to something he could neither describe nor understand. There were no fingerprints, no blood, no witnesses, just a desperate need for closure that eclipsed the truth. Gene Gibson was convicted of manslaughter and spent 5 years behind bars. But the evidence didn't fit, and his story didn't hold. Years later, a wave of independent journalism and legal advocacy forced the system to take a second look. Flaws in the police work were exposed. Coerced confessions, ignored protocols, overlooked details that pointed to another culprit. The wound reopened, but this time, daylight poured in. Gene was exonerated, released, and compensated, but his stolen years could never be returned. Josh Warneke's real killer was never found. The case remains unsolved, its files growing colder with each passing season. These events are not isolated, nor are they mere footnotes in Australia's long history of miscarriages of justice. They are wounds that ripple outward, shaping not only the lives of the families involved, but also the very fabric of trust in law enforcement and the courts. They speak to a legacy of marginalization, of voices silenced or unheard, of assumptions that prove deadly. Noah Kendrick's fictional journey, and that of his mother Lynn, was inspired by Josh and his mother Ingrid Bishop. Both women transformed grief into relentless action, refusing to accept the neat closure of an unjust conviction. They fought for answers long after others told them to move on. Their courage illuminated flaws in a system meant to protect them and forced a reckoning with the ugly truth that justice delayed often means justice denied. To this day, the memory of Josh Warneke looms large in Broome, a reminder that violence and loss do not always come from distant places or faceless strangers. Sometimes they rise from within, hidden until the moment the night cracks open and forever changes a town. The case is one of Western Australia's most haunting, a story recounted at kitchen tables, in classrooms, and in the pages of newspapers, always with the same aching question: will the truth ever come to light? The fictional details, The white ute, the hidden weapon, the final confession found too late, are shaped by the narrative needs of storytelling, yet they carry a deeper weight. The insistence that stories like these demand to be told, that every victim, real or imagined, deserves the dignity of remembrance and the hope of resolution. As Broome's skies flare gold and red at dusk, the pain of the past softens but does not vanish. The lesson remains. For every cold case that chills the bones, there are families, communities, and sometimes entire societies still waiting for justice, still waiting for the truth to emerge from the dark. The story of Noah Kendrick, and of those like him whose voices are lost too soon, never truly ends. Even as Broome returns to its rhythms, even as the roadside shrine weathers in the sun and salt, the memory of what happened lingers in every corner of the town and in the hearts of those who lived through it. Justice, when it finally arrived, felt bittersweet. The truth had been exhumed from years of silence and error, but its arrival could not turn back time or restore what had been taken. Noah's laughter would never echo through the house he promised to rebuild. His mother, Lynn, would always set one extra plate at the table, a silent tribute to the son she lost in the fight she refused to abandon. But tragedy can transform, even if it never heals. Broome's wounds forced its people to confront difficult questions. How does a community recover from the revelation that justice had failed, not just once, but over and over again? How do we keep faith in a system that for years traded closure for the truth? For Lynn Kendrick, the answer was perseverance. She turned grief into action, her private sorrow a fuel that pushed her, day after day, to demand better, not just for her son, but for everyone whose stories risked being buried or misremembered. She joined with other mothers, other families whose lives had been upended by similar tragedies, to advocate for reform and accountability. Together, their voices became impossible to ignore. Lynn's journey is mirrored by real women like Ingrid Bishop, who, after losing her son, Josh Warneke, turned her pain into a relentless pursuit of truth, refusing to let the case fade into obscurity or become just another statistic in a cold archive. Noah Kendrick's story is more than a crime. It is a warning and a lesson. It teaches us that the pursuit of justice is not a straight road, and that closure, if it ever comes, demands vigilance, courage, and community. It reminds us that even the safest places can harbor darkness, and that the only way to dispel it is to keep asking questions, to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Some lessons are stark but necessary. Never walk alone on dark, empty roads, no matter how safe a place feels by day. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it often is. Speak out when you witness injustice, even if it's easier to stay silent. The stories of Noah Kendrick, of Josh Warneke, and of the many whose names history might never record, urge us to examine the systems meant to protect us. They challenge us to hold law enforcement and courts accountable, to demand thorough investigations, to question easy answers, and to listen to those most at risk of being ignored. Broome's sunsets are as brilliant as ever, but now, when the last light fades, the town remembers. The shrine on Old Broome Road has become a place not just of mourning, but of gathering, a spot where families leave flowers, where strangers pause in respect, where children ask hard questions and adults promise to do better. It stands as a testament to resilience and the necessity of truth. As this story closes, we are left with a simple but powerful message. Some wounds can only be healed by the truth. Let us keep sharing these stories, keep honoring the memories of those lost, and keep fighting for a justice that does not settle for easy answers or convenient scapegoats. If Noah Kendrick and his mother Lynn have taught us anything, it is that the search for truth is never truly over, and that every voice, no matter how quiet, matters. Subscribe to our channel, Share these stories and join us in seeking justice for those whose voices were silenced. By remembering, by demanding better, we can help ensure that justice delayed is not, in the end, justice denied.